Fundamentals of Sponsored Projects at CSU series. This hour we are featuring Budgets, Part 1. My name is Catherine O'Hare. I am a Training and Information Coordinator with the Office of Sponsored Programs. I am your moderator for this session. We also have these interactive worksheets on the website. I dropped the link in the chat, and if you follow along with those, it gives you prompts for different ways to expand your knowledge or engage with the content. And there are some resources like videos to check out later, or links to things that we mentioned today. Today we have Mara Link and Sonia Lin.
Hi, I'm Mara Link. I am a grant proposal coordinator in biomedical sciences. I have been doing the department level research administration for just over 9 years. I have experience in both pre and post award. I have recently moved to where I'm doing pre-award only for the most part. My one takeaway or my one challenge to you today is years ago, when I first started, a new OSP director told me that you don't know what you know until you attend a training or a conference and you hear statements and you hear comments and you realize, I knew that. So I'm going to challenge you today to please watch for those moments when you realize that you already knew that.
Okay, and my name is Sonia Lin. I am a Research Support Services Coordinator at the College of Health and Human Sciences. I've actually been doing the research administration for just 3 years, so actually there is many more of you who know who know more than I do on this call. So, and I do want to thank all of you who actually taught me, because this is a lot of learning on the job, and truly, in my experience, teaching is the best learning. So Mara and I do welcome you to add, correct, suggest, or in any way enhance our presentation today. With that, let's start. So we're going to be looking at the first part of the project cycle, which is identifying opportunities, figuring out the team, and doing the budget. Doing the budget is definitely the overall, this is the responsibility of your PI, and we're here to help you. And I think one of the most important things is to say that the way you put together the budget in the very beginning will definitely affect all of the other steps of the life cycle. And prior to me doing the research administration and pre-award, I've done a lot of actual project implementation. And for me, this last step, which is the financial and programmatic management, has been really a lot of its success came from the way how well the budget had been thought through in this very initial stage. Okay, and this is the National Institute of Health. This is the sponsor that we in our department, in our school, work the most. And they do say that we do not expect your budget to predict perfectly how you will spend your money 5 years down the road. However, we do expect a reasonable approximation of what you intend to spend. Be thorough enough to convince the reviewers that you have a good sense of the overall costs. And this is really the tension between counting out the pennies and being reasonable. So understanding that even a year down the road, things might change, not to say 5 years down the road. So be as thoughtful as you can together with your PI, but do not, I think, go crazy with like I said, getting everything to the dollar, to the last dollar. And I just wanted to also show this is our Bible. This is the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200. And what's important to say, this is for illustration purposes only, because this is a living document and it changes all the time. Therefore, as you're working, make sure that you look for the latest regulations online, because that will be something that you will refer to often. Okay, next slide. And the 3 mantra words that we do use a lot as we're putting together the budget is the costs need to be allowable, allocable, and reasonable. When the costs are allowable, first of all, of course, they're necessary and they're reasonable, okay? They conform to the principles and conditions, in terms of conditions of this program and the sponsor's requirements. They're permitted by law. They are, and we'll talk about this later, they're consistently treated as direct or indirect costs and always adequately documented. for the costs to be allocable, you need to be able to allocate and assign them to a particular cost categories. They need to be incurred for this particular project only, and they need to be necessary for the advancement of this project activity. And of course, how do you call it? No double dipping. This should not be charged to other federal awards. This is very important. And reasonable. This is an interesting one, because I've heard this. I don't know if it's a joke, if this is for real. The pilot has this big book, probably thicker than this one. And if something goes wrong, they open and try to fix whatever. And when everything fails, there is this last saying: so be reasonable. Use your judgment. So it's always use your judgment. And this is something that what a rational person, I suppose, would be doing it in this particular situation. And there are always ways to try to figure out what the reasonable cost might be for a particular circumstance. Next slide.
So now we have an activity. We're going to go over a couple of different things to determine if it is an allowable expense. Stamp your choice. So advertising, is advertising an allowable cost? I see a red dot on it depends. Well, lots of red dots on it depends. Oh, one yes. It looks like there are maybe a couple of no's in there. So it looks, for the most part, it's been sort of a depend. Okay. So it really actually is kind of an it depends. Yes, if you have to recruitment of grant personnel, procurement of goods and services for award performance, disposal of surplus materials, unless you're being reimbursed for the disposal in the costs. Also, program specific outreach, or those that are allowed specifically by the sponsor or the program. No, if the cost solely promotes the non-federal entity, it's an excessive amount, like you do a full page ad or you do lots of color and make it pretty, and that's really not necessary. Also, you cannot purchase promotional items or memorabilia, and if according to the CFR 200, the cost is not specified, you can't do it then. My example of when it is accurate to do advertising, we actually have a grant in our department that is a National Needs Foundation. This grant requires outstanding students with interest in targeted expertise shortage areas in agriculture. They're just not everywhere, people with those skills. So we needed to advertise to get students to apply for the fellowship so that we would be able to fill those positions. It was listed in the solicitation as an allowable expense, and I put it in the justification specifically stating that it would be used for that. So that's where you could use advertising on a grant, the times that you can versus when you maybe cannot. Administrative salaries, are those allowable? Yes, no, or it depends. He's being creative down there. Nice. So it's interesting. I don't really see where anybody actually said no. Oh, there is one now. Okay, somebody decided to do that. Okay, so again, it depends in reality. So yes would fall under, it's normally considered as an indirect cost, which I think we all probably realize that. As a direct cost if it's integral to the project activity, or the individual can be specifically identified with the project and the activity, explicitly included in the budget, or you have prior written approval, and that the expense is not recovered in F&A. So I actually have a good example of this one as well. We just submitted a proposal that's a USDA conference grant proposal. We wrote a very strong justification as to why this expense should be charged to the project and why it is not covered in the F&A. This person will be an integral part to this project, as they will be responsible for the preparation and implementation of the logistics of the conference. While they are a normal admin person in our office, this is above and beyond what they would normally be doing. They are doing something specifically for this conference that makes it an allowable expense on the proposal, therefore on the grant if awarded. No would be if none of the conditions in the yes column are met, then obviously you shouldn't be charging it to the grant.
Okay, let's look at the iPad tablets.
Sonia, I think they're catching on. There's an awful lot of it depends. It's the mantra of research administration.
Right. It depends. Okay. So basically, normally it is considered an indirect cost, any type of a computing equipment, except for if it is part of the project, the integral part of the project. And we actually do have a lot of those. And this is not recovered as an FA, of course. And in a no, it's, if it's not, if we have, one of the examples has been if the professor wants to buy iPads for the students, that would not be an allowable expense. However, for the most part, if the tablet's computing equipment is used to perform project-specific tasks for surveying, for example, then that would be an allowable expense. So do you have any ideas or any interesting situations that you could share with us?
So I do have one. One of my PIs has a project that's actually over in Kenya, and he wrote a program that helps them to find the patient zero if they have an outbreak of an infectious disease over there. So they're out in the I can't think of the villages, so they don't necessarily have access to different to the things that we do. They don't have computer access and everything, but they were able to purchase tablets on the project, and they put tablets in each of the little village medical establishments, and they can go through and answer the questions in the program, and then that delivers the information back to the PI and also to the medical community there in Kenya. So it pays for the tablets and also pays for the internet connection for them to be able to give that information to the project. So many times that it's appropriate for tablets to be covered in proposals. Again, you have to put it in the budget, you have to justify it in your justification, and you have to follow all of the rules.
Okay, moving on to the budget categories.
Budget categories include direct costs and indirect costs. When you take the direct costs together and the indirect costs together, you have your total project cost, which that makes total sense, right? So we'll look at both of them in the next sections. First, we're going to talk about direct costs. Can you please share with us, just kind of start typing some samples of direct costs that you have all seen or used when creating budgets? Has there been any direct costs that you don't see listed on this slide that you want to type in chat? Looks like we kind of covered most all of it.
Looks like it.
Ooh, someone thought of something. Costs related to vehicles, mileage, lease fees, insurance. Is that a direct cost?
I would say that depends on the project and the proposal. What are they doing it? What are they using it for? If you're renting vehicles to travel to do field work, then that would be a direct cost.
Mm-hmm. Oh, grant application for post. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, grant applications. Okay, yes.
Can you see them again? You guys got really stamp happy. I love it.
Nice.
Okay, all of this, yes, exactly. All of this and more. We're going to look at some of those in detail. Personnel costs. Really, for most of the projects, the personnel costs make up a pretty significant chunk, a portion of the total project funds. And they consist of salaries, wages, and fringe benefits for employees, for the current or future employees. And of course, as we're doing this, as we're putting together the budget, a very important part is to understand which category, employees are going to be participating on the project, because that will definitely lead to applying the proper fringe rates. And if you see on the next slide, we have the latest approved fringe rates for various categories. And At about the same at about this time right now, we are actually getting the proposed fringe rates, and these are the rates that we have in quality, and it's easy to refer to. But it really depends on, I suppose, your department, your school, the way you're doing it, whether you're using the approved rates until the proposed have been established, or can start using the proposed rates already. And what we've seen sometimes, if the rates are going down, what we've seen that a lot of times we use the current rates to give a little bit buffer for the project. If the rates are going up, we're going with the rates that are going up again to be a little bit more accurate in terms of the future budgeting. And of course, it all depends on the sponsor too. Some sponsors want to see the approved rates, in fact. So it really depends on your how you're doing this or what the sponsor requires. And of course, in every type of every budget justification, we always state that the approved rates at the time the salary dollars are expended, that this is the rate that is going to be applied at the time. So that's something to remember. The way we calculate the personnel cost can be by person months or the effort. A person month, it's a matrix used to express the amount of time devoted to a project. Let's say 2 person month. Effort is actually a percentage. It's a proportion of time spent on an activity expressed as a percentage of total time, or FTE. And it's important to note that our quality actually does both. So you can basically refer back and forth. But here's a little exercise for you. So in this example, we have a postdoc candidate with a 12-month appointment and is devoting 20% effort to a project. Calculate person months. You can put it here or in the chat.
You have one guess. There's another.
Simple enough. Yep, 2.4. Exactly. All we do is we take an effort times the amount of months. I mean, very, very logical. Yep. Next example, we have an investigator that has a 9-month appointment and is devoting 1 person month to a project. What is the effort of the FTE? I'm going to...
It looks like you all are getting it. 1 person month.
1%, 11%, exactly. I think there was a question about what's the benefit of person month or the effort. I think it really depends on the sponsor. Some sponsors want you to show it in person months, and some are in percentage effort. I've seen it done both ways. I don't think that there is any particular benefit, at least in my opinion.
I can say, for me, I do have a PI that oftentimes they do short projects and there's like 1% effort on it or something like that. It looks better in 1% month effort on the budget justification than to say that they're putting in 0.012 months. So there'll be times that I'll do it, because to do it as a person month makes it look like they're really not putting any effort on it, when they are, but it's just such a short period. So that's when I definitely revert back to a percentage. And again, that's working with an industry. So that's a little bit different than if you're working with a federal sponsor. They'll have guidelines on what they expect to see in the budgets and the justifications.
I think it's also very important to remember very many of our faculty there on the 9-month appointment. Therefore, as you're calculating it, just, that's another element of being consistent and understanding that you are actually calculating effort on, their academic appointment. It's, so just be careful as you're determining that, knowing what their appointment is, and work through that. And I wanted to show in the next slide, I found that we actually at CSU, we have a calculator. I've never used that, unfortunately. I will. It basically helps you calculate the effort on any type of a 6-month, 3-month, 12-month academic appointment, which is great. And I also found a great so-called cheat sheet from the University of California, San Diego, and this is a little printout of that. It just basically helps me very easily refer to, based again, understanding that we're looking at a 12-month calendar year on a 9-month appointment. That will really shift your percent effort. So use whatever works for you. Also recognize and remember that Quali has all of that in there, and you can bounce it and see how it correlates. But this tools could make your life easier.
Right. So when I went in, I changed the green box, and then you push update, and it changes all the other boxes. I didn't know about it either, so I thought that was a cool tool.
Makes it easy. I think understanding that this is a 10,000 feet or 10,000 meter above the, we're doing a very high level overview of the budget specifics, and there's going to be the next session on a more in-depth budget. I think the important thing that we did want for you to remember and come away from this session and understanding that there must be at least 1% minimum effort for the PI or senior key personnel on the project. The way you do it, this is something that you probably will learn in the next session, whether that's a reportable, non-reportable cost share, or volunteer cost share. However you do it, just make sure that there is at least 1% minimum effort. And of course, the rule of thumb, the best case scenario is when you are actually allocating the actual effort of the personnel, but we understand that circumstances may be different. So this is our best practices. First of all, verify that this person is actually the CSU employee. Sometimes we've had the situations where a person on the project turns out not to be a CSU employee, creates slight challenges in creating the budget. Calculate salaries using the Quali. I think all of us do have Excel spreadsheets where calculating the budget and things like that, but the most appropriate, the most current, and the closest numbers you get through Quali anyway. Don't forget the fringe rates. This is something that's extremely important, and as I mentioned earlier, understanding the classification of the personnel will really help you get to the necessary fringe rates, and they vary greatly. So that will really affect your budget if this is not calculated properly. Okay, let's talk about equipment.
Okay, as it states on this slide, equipment is defined as a tangible personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year, and a per unit cost which equals or exceeds the lesser value of the capitalization level. Basically, if it's a useful life of more than 1 year, and if it costs $5,000 or more. Now, with that stated, equipment and the acquisition costs and things like that, that is one of those things that sometimes it goes up and it goes down a little bit. I guess up probably more than anything, but you do want to kind of stay on top of that and keep track of check the references for updates to UG pretty regularly to make sure you're staying on top of that. Usually OSP is wonderful about sending out emails through the RAM around listserv to let us know when there's changes that are made and things like that. So just kind of try to make sure you stay in the loop on all of that. So we're going to do a little one to see, is this equipment or is this supplies? So maybe respond in the chat or type on here, I guess, whichever way you want. But can you tell us if $8,000 for laptops, 4 laptops at $2,000 each, is that going to be equipment or supplies? Wow. Okay. So coming through pretty quickly. Yes, those are supplies. Now, if we have, Sandra is saying equipment if used for more than 1 year. The reason it's not equipment is because it is only $2,000 each. So if it was a big heavy duty computer that was going to be $10,000 for the whole computer system, then yes, maybe so. But in this case, it definitely would qualify for supplies. Next up was $5,000 software purchase. Is this going to be equipment or supplies? Or does it depend? Okay, supplies not tangible. Okay, so we actually had one that got this and caught on to that. It actually depends. If it is an annual license, then it is materials. If it is a forever purchase, then it is actually considered equipment. So it depends on the service duration. Next up is a $5,000 printer purchase. Equipment or supplies? Okay, so in this case, yes, it is equipment. That's what we saw the most in the responses on the chat. And then we have a $4,000 microscope purchase. Is that equipment or is that supplies? Supplies are coming out fast and furious. $4,000 microscope purchase would be considered supplies because it is under the $5,000 limit. What is the, so there is a question about, they thought that we were now up to 10,000 for equipment. Catherine, can you help with that one?
So that was sent out recently about our campus's threshold, but
Okay.
the uniform guidance and in sponsored projects, we are still currently at, yeah, not for 53 accounts. We are at the 5,000 threshold.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I wasn't 100% sure because that tends to get a little more close to work and I didn't want to give the wrong answer. Okay, next is we have $6,000 for a lab technician salary and fringe, plus we're adding $20,000 in supplies for fabrication. Is this equipment or supplies in the end? Well, there, got that one. Oh, nobody's touching this one. Equipment. Okay, that had a little bit slower response. I can understand because this was one that honestly, if I didn't have the cheat sheet to tell me, I would not know the answer because we don't do this in the area that I work in. So this is considered equipment. I would assume that yes, it's probably going to fall under a WIP account type situation. Again, that's not an area that I work with, so I cannot speak expertly about that. But I will listen, I will read my cheat sheet and tell you that it's equipment.
Yeah, let's
Jackie?
define WIP.
Yep. So who's going to define WIP? Not me.
What is WIP? Someone throw it in the chat. Work in progress. Good job. It's a type of account that we use for fabrications. We get to talk about that a little bit in the awards setup session too, but it relevant and came up today.
I also wanted to go back to there was a question about salary increases after the project has been awarded. And I think it's also important that depending on the sponsor, there are ways to reallocate some funds between the categories. So you just need to check and see if that's possible to do. And if it's not, then it's just a reduction of effort if this is firmly fixed. But in many cases, you can just play with the reallocation of the budget, given certain percentage requirements based upon the sponsor.
Right, the deviation authority. Ooh, we have some big answers in the chat regarding the 5,000 versus 10,000. Thank you, Jenny, for finding that language. And Jen is talking about CSU equipment fabrication policy. Only the actual hands-on assembly by technicians is allowed to be included in the equipment fabrication as labor costs. The costs of design and testing the equipment are not fabrication labor. It should only be the hands-on assembly of the pieces of equipment that are part of the fabrication costs. The time to design and test a custom fabrication are research costs for the university, not equipment fabrication, and should be reflected in the personnel costs and should be subject to F&A. That's great to know. Thanks for answering that question, Jen.
AO brings up a question that I do think needs to kind of be addressed as far as the technically decreasing effort because of the expense if the salary increases. So that is one that we usually stick with the effort and have to offset. So for example, NIH doesn't allow escalation in their proposals. We usually have a way of doing an average of what their salary would be over that period of time, if it's a 5-year project. And that's the salary that we submit, is that average salary over the 5 years. So in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit more money than we'll actually charge. And in the end, it's going to be a little bit less money than what we would actually charge that we're asking for. So hopefully over the course of the 5 years, it's all covered. However, if it's one that we did not do escalation, then we would still have to keep with the effort that we told them that we would do in the proposal, and just have to offset that increase with either department funds or additional, maybe if they could do a little bit of trimming someplace else in the budget. Maybe they trim in their travel budget a little bit, or in the supplies budget. So just to be aware of that, if you do put it in a proposal and you put it into the grant, that this is the effort that a PI is going to work, that is the effort that they're supposed to work, except for each of the sponsors has a percentage that you can reduce the effort by without getting prior approval.
Exactly. Check with the
yes.
sponsor. Exactly. Always check with the sponsor. It is best to correspond with them and have it all in writing.
Well, and I actually, from the department level, we always go through our college level and our OSP team. Department level in biomedical sciences does not usually reach out directly to the sponsor. We go through the college level office, and then we go to our sponsored programs team to get the answers for stuff like that. And then they kind of give us direction. So I hope that didn't get things too far astray. Shall we travel now? I think we should go to travel. There we go. I'm ready to be on that big jet plane. Someplace sunny and a beach would be really nice. So let's talk about travel costs. Expenses for transportation, lodging, and subsistence related to project proposal travel on a sponsored project should be budgeted under travel, of course. That kind of makes sense. Funds may be requested for travel to domestic or foreign scientific meetings, or to conduct fieldwork, or for consultation with the funding agency, or with colleagues concerning the project per the sponsor guideline. When you're working on your funding budget, if you have foreign budget and you have domestic budget, make sure that you separate them, that you don't put them in as one lump. This is our travel expenses. You want to make sure that you're noting if you're doing any foreign travel, because that will require some additional justification in the budget. So let's talk about traveling internationally. Next slide, please. If you're traveling internationally, make sure, oh, I like the plane going across. That was the first time I saw that. That was funny. Sorry. For international travel, we do need to make sure that we're following the Fly America Act, which states that we need to use American carriers whenever it is at all possible when traveling to foreign countries. This is something that the way our department handles it is, for the most part, our PIs go through the travel agency that will then make sure that they're following all of these rules and everything. So this is kind of more of a just be aware that the PI needs to know that there is some rules and regulations about flying American Airlines whenever possible. Obviously, if you get into some of the countries, that's not an option, but maybe it will be. And then we've also had, Sonia and I were talking about having some different oddities. I have one PI that was going to fly to Cambodia to do some work, but then within Cambodia, they were going to be going to different destinations. So then it was like, okay, they obviously can't fly America from the different destinations within Cambodia, so that won't fall into that. So that's for the Fly America Act, that's the main thing. The putting your travel into your budget, the most important thing, and I mean, I've kind of said it throughout this whole time, is your justification. To just put on the budget that they're going to go to a conference and they want $2,500 for one person to attend the conference, or they want $5,000 for two people to attend the conference, is really not enough justification if you can eke more information out of the PI. I will usually say, do you have a conference in mind that you would go to? Is it a USDA conference, since it's a USDA grant? Would you be going to one of their conferences? Is there, the other thing to watch for when preparing the budget and looking at the solicitation is, are there mandatory meetings that they have to attend? The PIs don't always see that when they're planning on submitting a proposal. Suddenly they're like, oh, I have to attend this meeting, but I didn't put any money in the proposal for it, so I don't have the money to go to the meeting. So do keep an eye out for that, but also pay attention to where they're traveling. It is more expensive to travel to a meeting in DC than it is to travel to a meeting in San Diego, for example. So if they're going to go to DC, that $2,500 is probably not going to do it for them. They're probably going to need more money. And of course, if they're having more people go, they'll need additional money. Other direct costs. Sonia, we were going to try to see if we could kind of stump each other on this, but I don't know that we really can. What if we ask the audience if they can just kind of list some of the other direct costs when they're breaking down between, what are other direct costs that they've seen?
What's your experience, and what's the craziest other direct costs that you've had? Publication fees, okay. Not so crazy.
For user fees, tuition, services.
Facility rental.
So only certain departments would understand animal per diem, because you may not work with animals. Probably the computer, the business office, the College of Business probably doesn't have too many animals, but we have to have, the lettuce and raisins to feed the crabs in the crab lab. Oh, I like that one.
That would be other direct costs. That's right.
Definitely, yeah. Okay. So that basically other direct costs includes, it's very interesting. Sonia and I were actually just talking about this as we were going through preparing for the training. The fact that while in my mind it's always been materials and supplies or other direct costs, in reality, other direct costs are everything other than personnel. Materials and supplies fall under other direct costs. So when you're doing your budget, you've got your personnel, and then you've got all of your other direct costs. And then that gives you your total direct project cost. It also helps, I'm just going to add this in, it also helps when you're laying out your budget justification. You should follow your budget as much as you can. They're maybe going to cover this more in the part 2, but you follow the budget layout with your justification. So you have your personnel listed first in your budget. It should also be listed first on your justification. And just kind of try to make that match up so that it's easy for the reviewers to look that over.
Yeah, that's a great point. Or for example, in NIH or NSF applications, they do have their own, the way they have it listed in their own application portals, and you can definitely follow those. It makes it much easier for the reviewers.
I actually even use their outline numbers and everything in my budget justification and in the tables.
Yep. Okay. That brings us to the indirect costs. We all love indirect costs. Indirect costs, these are the costs that are incurred for common or joint objectives, and therefore cannot be directly and readily identified for a particular project. And indirect cost definitely depends, the next slide, definitely depends on the type of a project activity, type of a sponsored activity. And that's also important to recognize that when we're assigning this, that whether this project is a research activity, whether it's an instructional activity, or other sponsored activity. And your indirect cost assignment will definitely greatly vary based upon the activities that are going to be proposed. This is our current negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, NICRA, and definitely pay attention as we're putting this together, pay attention to the effective period, because as we all know, ours has been changing for the last couple of years, increasing as we're talking about research activities, and we need to be careful in figuring out the correct, most current rate. Also, as our university has NCRA, many others don't, the smaller universities don't, and they then use the de minimis indirect rate of 10%. I actually know that the CSU Pueblo is using the de minimis. So many cases, as you're working with subs, for example, this comes into play. You know, do they have NCRA, or is this a de minimis? Or very often, as if we're talking, for example, not federal, other type of sponsors, they would have their own indirect rate listed, and then it gets tricky because you know, we just need to be careful and use the appropriate indirect rate applied to a particular project.
Do we want to answer instructional activities question that just came in?
Some of the projects include instructional activities. I really have not had any, maybe one in my career. Maybe others have had those.
I had one when I was managing arts and sciences. One of the units had proposed something about instructing instructors. Yeah, them teaching them how to work in the field and be instructors in that specific topic. It's a small category. We don't see it as much. There's also another comment. We'd never allow GTA salary on a 53 account, right? What's a GTA? We're using acronyms.
Teaching assistant.
Has anyone seen that allowable on a 53 before?
When I've had graduate teaching assistants, if a PI has, on a grant, if the PI has a student that goes and does the graduate teaching assistant for a semester, they come off of the grant. Because my understanding, and this is definitely not my level of expertise, is that the salary and the tuition should be paid by wherever they're doing the work, wherever they're doing the teaching assistant at. So if they're doing a teaching assistant for BMS, but they're on a grant for an MIP, the microbiology, immunology, pathology department, then they are off of that. Oh, Jenny, she knows what she's talking about. What is she saying? Typically, GTAs are not paid from a 5.3, but the word never doesn't apply to research. That is a very valid point. The word never does not apply to research administration. It depends is what applies to research administration. So what I've experienced is GTAs come off of the grant and they're paid by the department that they're doing the teaching assistant in.
Now, we all know that you can see, you know, bathroom facilities, lights, heat, water, library access, all of this. These are the pieces that support the project activities, and it's very difficult to allocate it to a particular project. Therefore, we're using this specific percentage. But now let's maybe talk more about what those indirect costs really are, and can we distinguish and determine between direct and indirect costs. We actually have a distribution of indirect costs, and some of them goes to the university, you know, directly. Some come back to the particular department. So there are certain percentages, proportions that is distributed. Okay, yeah, I was looking at the indirect cost waiver, and the waiver actually has it all written out as to which percentages go to which parts of the university.
Okay.
Okay, now let's test it. Give it a check if, in your opinion, it qualifies as an indirect, and give it an X if it does not qualify as an indirect. Some might be, it depends. Maybe a smiley face could be on it depends. Okay, I think electricity costs to run the MRI machine is unanimous. Okay. admin assistant salary for helping to arrange travel for project participants. I think Mara talked about that. It really depends on, if that's the overall project. Usually that's an activity that the department does, and that would be part of the indirect. Participant support cost for travel, that doesn't qualify. Cost for iPads, to conduct surveys, we talked about that. MRI machine to test project subject, doesn't qualify. Yeah, I think that's very consistent. I think it's number 9, reams of paper for printing survey. And I think 9, 10, and 11, it does depend if the surveys are the primary part of the project. If it is, then it's part of the project. If it's just a few, then perhaps an indirect would be best suited for that. Maintenance cost for grants funded MRI machine. I don't know that one. Most likely it does not qualify as an indirect because it's an MRI machine for the for the specific project. But what if it is in the lab? Might be, it depends category.
Great, so document it, justify why you're doing it, why it is necessary, allowable per your award, and allocable to that specific one, instead of being spread out, right? Like indirects are.
I think we're very consistent, pretty consistent here. So,
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Go ahead, Mara.
Talking about the definition of off-campus. The off-campus rate will apply for the activities if they are performed in facilities not owned by the institution and where these facilities costs are not included in the F&A pools, where rent is directly allocated, charged to the projects. Grants or contracts will not be subject to more than one F&A cost rate. If more than 50%, and this is the key, if more than 50% of the project is performed off-campus, the off-campus rates will apply to the entire project. Does anybody have an example of an off-campus, a project that qualified for off-campus rates that they'd like to share?
When I worked for the extension, most of the extension, the Office of Extension and Engagement is actually the off-campus.
Yeah, and that would be the same for the SEML group that Team 4 supports. And the majority of their work is done off campus. So the examples of that are they go on to various bases around the country and they need to do weed mitigation and culvert restoration and that kind of stuff. So all of that work happens off campus. And you have to balance that with, okay, well, who's the PI in charge of the project isn't actually going to the sites. They're managing the project from CSU. So you want to look at how much work they're doing on the project versus how much of that on-hands work that's being done off campus. And that's where that more than 50% comes into the definition. So it's not black and white, and definitely a discussion needs to happen.
I think that's probably the biggest key on a lot of this. If you ever have a question, reach out to your OSP team and have them work with them to help come up with a decision rather than putting the proposal completely together with a whole lot of, well, I think this is the way it should be. If you have a question, you can also put it out there in the Ram Around listserv. Just put it out there. Nobody's going to be like, well, you should know this. You've been here for 3 months. You should know the answer to this already. Or you've been here for 9 years. You should know the answer. We all have our little niches that we get into that we really know what we're doing. But then there's other stuff, WIP, for example, that I will never have to do. So I say that. I should not say that. It'll come up next week. I would hope I would never have to do. So just be prepared to reach out and ask questions. Never feel like somebody's going to judge you on it because they won't. They really won't.
Good practice is also definitely having the project budget approved before it is submitted to the sponsor. Therefore, the office, our Office of Sponsor Programs will catch or will question you on an appropriate, which appropriate rate you're applying, why you're applying the rate. So
yeah.
Absolutely.
And sure, but those, if there's a question when going through the RFP, those discussions are great
Yep.
to have before you start building that budget
Even
too.
that.
I've had to totally redo a budget after spending 3 days on it, totally redo it because we missed something. So yeah, it's definitely worth, just ask the question real quick.
I'll
Okay.
also read the RFA carefully, because in many cases, indirect costs are not included in the amounts that are stated. In others are. The way they want them calculated also very much depends. Is it on other direct costs, or is it a percentage of the total costs? So just check and recheck.
Go to the next slide. Okay.
Oh, what is that?
Modified total direct cost, or MTDC base. So we'll talk a little bit about this one. I'm going to ask you guys just to take a minute to read this rather than me reading it to you. Just take a moment to read this, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about what is excluded in this statement. Okay, so can you tell me, looking at this, what are some of the things that are excluded if we use a modified total direct cost? Obviously, the first thing that's listed is that it will exclude equipment. So if you have equipment, obviously you're not going to, that's part of the MTDC exclusion. Tuition came up here, a subaward amount over the 25,000. Jackie nailed them all. She put them out there. Tuition, equipment, subs over 25,000. So basically, when you're doing your proposal, if you're doing modified total direct cost and you have any of those three things on your proposal, on your budget, when you go to calculate the F&A at the end, you're going to pull out any of those items. You're going to pull out the fellowships, the participant support. There is a lot more. Again, in my area, what I'm using the most are the three: the subaward, the equipment, and the tuition. So you'll pull those totals out, and then you'll calculate your F&A on the base amount that came from the MTDC. So we're going to talk briefly first about the difference. Modified total direct cost, we just talked about it. It has these exclusions. Total direct cost has all of the expenses in there. So if you're doing total direct cost, you are going to charge F&A on the tuition. You are going to charge it on all of the subaward. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind is look in the announcement, or some people call them announcements. I call it the solicitation, RFA, RFP, all of those mean basically the same thing. Your guidelines. Look in those. If it says it's total direct cost, we want to do it with that. If it's total direct cost, then we're putting all this stuff back in, unless the solicitation tells you you can't. So a lot of this, it's just knowing your solicitation and going through it. Oh, total direct cost, I was going to add, if you do industry, industry is always shifted to a total direct cost, not modified direct cost. So if industry for some reason is covering a tuition, they're going to have to pay their the total direct cost on that. They don't usually do that. Yep, Jen just said we also use TDC when working with industry. So
just hang on a second. There was this question by Julie, and we usually use TDC if the IDC rate is less than 53.5. I believe that's correct, but again, check the announcement.
Yes. If it's anything other than our negotiated rate, we move to TDC. I'm sorry, unless it tells you you can't. Right. Sometimes in some of the solicitations, it will tell you differently. And then I see that there was a question of who decides whether to use MTDC. In reality, we use MTDC unless we're told we can't, or it's under our negotiated rate. I think that that covers it. Okay, so let's do this real quick. Calculate it if you can. Pull out your phone calculators if you're not quick doing it in your head. That would be me. I've gotten so used to using a calculator for everything. Okay, so on here, what is listed that we need to pull out to create our MTDC base? Subaward up to, now, is there any equipment? There's equipment on there. Do we pull out the whole 40,000 on the subaward? Or do we only pull out 15,000? Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So the 25K is correct. We're going to put 25K on the base, but we're going to subtract out the 15,000 to get our base. So our new base is going to be 157,000. Oh, Jackie caught something there. She would need to know what the other is before she can calculate. What if the other happens to be tuition? In this case, it is not. I can tell you that. In this case, it's services of some sort. It's not, we would have listed it specifically as tuition, but that is a good point. When you see other expenses, make sure you're asking your PI what those other expenses are for, because they don't necessarily understand what we're looking for. Okay, so 157,000 is what we would be calculating that.
That was a great catch.
That was a very good catch. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. Brought up that we do talk about participant support. So continuing budgets this week, we'll have Liza and Julie, and we cover a little more nuanced pieces of budgets like NIH salary caps, cost share, subawards, budget justifications.
Well, thank you so very much. This was interesting. This was exciting. This was a great teamwork with our training team, Mara and I. And thank you for all of the questions. They are great. You can see that you guys know a lot. So
that brings that up. Yeah. So how many of you guys were sitting there going, "Oh, I actually knew that," and you didn't think you knew
exactly.
It. See? It'll just build up. You'll get good at this. You'll get to where you got it down and you'll be doing trainings in no time.
I want to give a special thanks to our presenters today for sharing their expertise. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Mara. And thank you to everyone that participated and helped share some of their knowledge. On behalf of the OSP Training and Professional Development Committee, thank you for your participation in today's session.